an APEC, which is being hosted by Malaysia, not to mention, of course, G20 that's happening over the weekend. China specifically, though, should we be concerned about the bond probes and the over-leverage in China as it seeks to recover from the pandemic-hit economy?
Well, we should not. I think that those specific banks should be, perhaps sort of minding their step going forward. But I would say this, you're exactly right. We need liquidity in the system. We are going to see a lot of industries, not just banks and bond traders, under stress. We've already seen that. And a natural thing that happens at every single credit cycle is you have some degree of defaults. You can't get away from this. It's not really trying to avoid those, it's how do you deal with them.
But in China's case, Johan, I mean, we know that it's a managed economy and there's so many state-owned enterprises. The one interesting thing is that one of the underwhelming responses in the stock markets have been from the big banks in China. What worries investors there? Is it the fact that, China in its sort of debt cleanup and with the defaults looming is going to say, you know what, you guys are going to foot the bill, not necessarily the bondholders?
Well, yeah, that's part of the problem. Keep in mind, global banks have not done well. It's a general phenomena that when economies do badly, your traditional banking businesses struggle with things like net interest margin. Yield curves are flat, so the traditional way of making money is harder to achieve. So it's not confined to just Chinese financials. Surely there are some specific issues that you've mentioned. But if you look across Europe and the US, these banks are facing the same issue. They've got worsening credit quality on balance sheet that had to make big provisions. So it's a global problem, sort of exacerbated maybe by something of an overhang in China compared to some of the other places. But this is going to be a feature of the landscape, and I would say, don't be overly focused on the fact that there's something going on in China in this space. Look at some of the other markets as well. You are going to have this in 2021, maybe even longer, for the simple reason that economies that struggle have companies that struggle, and this ends up on bank balance sheets in the form of bad loans.
Does that suggest that there is a lot of mispricing and distorted asset prices in the markets? And okay, you can blame all of the central banks around the world for juicing it all with trillions of stimulus there. But are you excited about that, put together with the fact that we are seeing something more definitive in the US in terms of the election? The latest news, of course, being the recount in Georgia going to Biden there, and the vaccines are more or less around the corner.
Well, the issue with the vaccines is how long are they going to take to roll out? That's still an open question, but that's a good piece. We certainly expect the policymakers have seen what can happen. They know what can go wrong. It was vivid in March and April, so we expect them to be on the button. But we don't expect it to necessarily get back to any sort of level that we see or that we saw pre-COVID. You have to expect some of these stresses to still be around. Some of them will give opportunities. There will be distressed debt. There will be interesting things in the bond market. There will be mispricings. Be aware of these. But I think, be also aware of the fact that, just say the next few months might be, really important just to see, to kind of lay the foundation for a good 2021.
Well, November has turned out to be a remarkable month, at least now that we do have a little bit more clarity on several fronts, at least in terms of U.S. politics and also, on the basis of the vaccines, perhaps not the COVID situation, because let's face it, that just gets uglier and uglier. But I want to get to your thoughts on that in terms of what's that going to mean for the fundamentals of corporate profits as we see this uneven growth. And actually, I'm more talking about the US and Europe, which are basket cases when it comes to COVID-19. European continent, 15 million cases. The US knocking on the door of 12 with umpteen dozen numbers of deaths there, and they don't seem to be getting a handle on it. The Europeans can't come together on the $2 trillion stimulus, neither can the Americans.
Exactly right. So I think, they do not have, in Europe and the US, they clearly do not have a handle on the outbreak. I mean, that's very obvious now. We've also seen this movie before. It's one we should remember really well, and we saw it in Q2 and Q3. The numbers look ugly. As soon as you have to go back into lockdown or some form of lockdown, there are certain sectors that do particularly poorly, and their numbers come out bad. When they show the EPS, the earnings, it's not going to be nice. Now, the market is taking the view that the policymakers have learned their lesson, are going to be there. So you mentioned 2 trillion here, 2 trillion there. Quite soon we're going to be talking about real money as the joke goes. They have to get this in line. They have to get agreement on it. And it has to happen sometime, I would say, before Christmas. Otherwise, we are going to have something of a wobbly. I think the market is not going to be infinitely patient, but at the moment they're giving policymakers the benefit of the doubt.
Johan, in the meantime, of course, we've got the APEC summit underway, being hosted by Malaysia, the G20 happening over the weekend, and there are warning signs about the global economy, not thanks to the US and Europe situation right now. But is the answer to that the multilateral trading system that they keep talking about as a key priority, because RCEP just got the green light? Are you as excited about that, and is there any overlap with TPP? And bottom line, will we see a multiplier effect here?
Well, I think there's a distinct differentiation here globally, or at least regionally, because it looks like Asia is still quite keen to go the integration route, whereas we've seen what especially the US wants to do is like not really get involved. So I think the interesting thing is how this shifts the tectonic plates on the global trade front, and to what extent there's a pivot in Asia towards greater integration, which could sort of be an accelerator, where the rest of the world is somewhat aloof, either deliberately or accidentally, because they're too focused on trying to get COVID under control. I think that, to me, is the longer-term thing. Short run, these sort of trade negotiations, I don't know if they tend to be sort of that market-moving. Occasionally they can be. But the longer-term sort of geopolitical implications of where the alignments fall out, sort of how countries align themselves now, I think that could be very, very interesting, and that could be a plus for Asia on a longer-term view.
Johan, always appreciate your time and your thoughts and analysis. That was Johan Joost, CIO at the Global CIO Office. Well, folks, that's wrapping up Friday's edition of Asia First, and indeed the entire week. We so do appreciate your company. Do have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you on Monday.
All right, see you again. Bye-bye.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's one of the gravest challenges facing humankind.
Climate change is a super wicked problem.
These places will become uninhabitable.
Now, it's the defining moment of a generation. How will our actions impact the world we live in?
There are actually solutions.
We look at opportunities to create more natural capital.
Join CNA on this special journey with a dedicated prime-time documentary built on the climate crisis. Every Monday on CNA. Also available live and on demand on CNA.Asia and the CNA Insider YouTube channel.
日本で最も美しい村ということで、風景はすごい綺麗ですね。こんにちは。これいただきます。どうぞ。大丈夫でしたら一皿これください。くるー。
Japan Hour, Saturday on CNA. Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation, ANA, and SMBC.
Headline news this hour. Hong Kong facing a fourth wave of coronavirus infections. Authorities warn the situation is deteriorating and don't rule out the possibility of tightening restrictions. The U.S. state of California has issued a limited curfew for the vast majority of residents to stay at home after 10 p.m., while the CDC has warned against traveling for Thanksgiving as COVID-19 infections accelerate across the nation. The World Health Organization warns a tough 6 months lies ahead for Europe as the pandemic threatens to overwhelm health systems around the continent.
Last week, Europe registered over 29,000 new COVID-19 deaths. That is one person dying every 17 seconds.
And the head of the World Health Organization, Tedros Ghebreyesus, rebuts accusations by the Ethiopian military that he procured arms and attempted to influence the course of conflict in his home country. That's the latest from our CNA newsroom this Friday.
If China is a dragon, Shanghai is its head, said Deng Xiaoping. Shanghai spearheaded China's market reforms and propelled China to become the world's second largest economy. Living in the economic heart of China, I feel its heart beats strong, where many, like myself, migrants chasing their dreams.